And all she said when she walked up to me was, this book walked me out of suicide. On the days that I didn't want to get out of bed, and on the days that I wanted to swallow the pills, you convinced me not to.
Wow. Wow. And that's why you write books. That's why artists make music. That's why people do, is for the one. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest today is Charles Martin. He's a New York Times bestselling author who writes books about love and loss and the healing power of both of those things. His words grab you and make your heart beat faster. It's like he gets into your head and he knows exactly how to keep you wanting more. I'm not done yet, Charles, hang on. He's not afraid to tackle difficult subjects like human trafficking and the dark, disgusting world that many of us just don't want to think about or talk about. But they are stories that catapult from the pages with such power and emotion that you can't help but savor every word. His books are filled with suspense, which makes them impossible to put down. Charles Martin, though, is so much more than just an author. He's a husband, a father, and a bow hunter. Charles, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it. And so thank you.
So much I want to talk to you about. Of course, we're gonna talk a little bit about bow hunting. We'll save that at the end, but I want to get into a little bit of the basics. How and when did you know that you wanted to write novels?
I'm 52. I started writing when I was about 15. Up until that time, the only thing I wanted to do was be outside, whether it was, with official. I grew up on a river, so I had a little bit of a Huck Finn childhood. But at about the age of 15, I think I had like my first perfect storm. Like, maybe you and I today will have a relatively intelligent conversation, and I won't drool and like make a fool out of myself. But at 15, I didn't have the skills. I did not know how to tell you if there was something going on here or here. I didn't know how to tell you, hey, that thing bothered me, or I don't know what to do with that, or that. I didn't have the tools. I didn't even know where to begin. So somewhere at about 15, I hit girls. Do they like me? Will they go out with me? Grades. Can I make grades good enough to satisfy my folks? Can I make grades good enough to go play college football? Because that was really what I wanted to do. And then hormones. And I didn't know what to do with all that soup. And so for reasons I still honestly don't understand, I sat down one night and I wrote a short story. The short story had nothing to do with what I just told you, but the process of doing this, because I typed it out, was like a vent on a pressure cooker for me. And it was probably the first time in my life that I experienced like a really deep breath. I mean, it was just this. So then I kept doing it through high school, college, grad school. I didn't really attempt a novel until I was 27. I was probably intimidated. I remember going into the Barnes and Noble. When I was in grad school, we would have these study groups and stuff in Barnes and Noble. And every time you'd walk in there are these ginormous faces up on the wall: Steinbeck, Hemingway, name your icon, whatever. And so I think subconsciously what I took from that is, if you want to be in this place and want to have like 2 inches of shelf space in this room, then you got to be one of them. And I didn't know what, so I don't know, one day, probably out of desperation, I walked in there and I thought to myself, well, these people weren't always them. I mean, at some point they were just me. And from there, I dove into a longer story. It just became, a bunch of short stories that I sort of wove together in this mosaic that became The Dead Don't Dance, which was published in 2003.
Wow. Okay, so how much of what's on the pages in your books, especially, yes, by the way, I did finish The Record Keeper, and I got to ask you, does it go on? Does Murphy Shepard have another story in him?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe when we're not recording, I'll tell you more. But I have two conflicting emotions there, and honestly, I don't know. I don't know.
Good answer. All right. I'll accept that. But how much of you is in your characters?
Well, if you read my early stuff, The Dead Don't Dance, When Crickets Cry, Maggie, Wrapped in Rain, um, I don't know, any of my early stuff, like all of us novelists, when we first write, we only know us. So we write what we know. And I think every first couple of novels is autobiographical to some extent. It may not be the truth of our lives, but certainly it's emotively true because it's all we know. And then you get, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9 books in, something like that. I now have 17 novels. And I think, your magic hat gets kind of empty and you're like, well, I don't know, I got to go make some stuff up now. So then it becomes this weaving between, new stuff, trying to write new stories, trying to remember what you've already written so you don't say the same thing twice, but then also being emotively true to the like, because people will spot a fake. Readers will spot a fake really quickly. So early in my first book, The Dead Don't Dance. I was 40, maybe 60 pages in. And I had decided beforehand, it's a love story about a guy and his wife. She's in a coma and he can't wake her up. So it's a lot of him going back and forth to the hospital. And he's just this brutal place where he can't wake her up. And I decided, I think it's a pretty tender love story, but I decided I was not going to air mine and Christie's laundry. I wasn't going to let people into my home. So I was going to write a female character that didn't look and sound like Christie because I didn't want everybody knowing like my stuff,
Right.
I got about 60 pages in and I didn't even like her. She was a cardboard character. She was 2-dimensional. And I literally just delete all of her. And I went back in and I wrote what I know, which is, Christy and I've now been married 30 years. So I write what I know. And so
Yeah.
one of these days, somebody will psychoanalyze me and they'll, say, hey, a lot of your female characters are really very similar. And I'm like, you think? So that was part of my process.
Well, I could tell when I first started reading your books, I started reading the Murphy Shepherd series, the Water Keeper, the Record Keeper, and the Letter Keeper. Only about less than a month ago, a friend of mine shared them with me. And I'm like, I'm constantly on the search. I'm surrounded right now by hundreds of books. You can't see it, but literally I love books. I love to read. I love to be swept away. And your books have the perfect combination of a love story, but intrigue and adventure and thrill. I got goosebumps right now just thinking about it. But you had mentioned your readers can spot a fake. You started talking early on about some military terms and some hunting terms, and you brought up a crossbow and I'm like, who is this guy? So I did cyber stalk you a little bit. And who'd have thought that you're a bow hunter? And I like your shirt. We shoot the same exact bow, Matthew's bow.
I wore that for you today.
Thank you. I was just going to tell them, I need some more swag. I need hats and I need that. But we talked also about how you started writing about human trafficking, because that is something that I literally just found out about a couple of years ago. January 2020, I went down a rabbit hole, so to speak, and just discovered I'm sickened and disgusted that this, number one, still exists, and number two, is so prevalent. How did you find out about this, and how is it that you wanted to share this with your readers?
Let me answer the Murphy Shepherd question first.
Okay.
I've had a lot of folks tell me like they think, Charles, like secretly, are you really Murphy Shepherd? And I'm not. I'm writing vicariously. I wish I was more like him. I've done some fun stuff, and I've done some training around the country. I've been to Thunder Ranch and spent some time with Clint Smith. I shoot a Matthews, so I love Matt McPherson and that whole world. And I'm a bow hunter, and so a lot of that stuff is adventurous to me, but I'm not Murphy Shepherd. He's much cooler, much stronger, much whatever. With regards to trafficking, Yeah, it's our modern day slavery. It has since surpassed the drug trade as the most profitable illicit trade. The reason for that is because you could sell a drug once, but you can sell a 10-year-old boy 50 times in a week. And if that makes you want to vomit, it should. It's evil. It's the evil of our day. A couple years ago, I was on a book tour, and I told you this. A book tour for me is just to get in my truck and drive around 20 something stops around the
Not
Southeast and see
anymore, though.
people.
Not
Yeah, that's
anymore.
changed a little bit. I see these folks who have hand sold my books and been just, so the bookstores I'm a big fan of these bookstores. So I'm making the rounds and I end up in Beaufort, Georgia at Liberty Books. And I get in town about 2 and I've got a couple hours before my thing. So I throw my stuff in my room. I walk down the hallway to get a bottle of water. And where I come from, if you stay at a place where the door faces the parking lot, we call that a motel,
Yep.
not a hotel. The hotel faces a hallway. So I'm in a motel that my publisher put me in for reasons I still can't figure out. And I'm pretty low maintenance. So I'm like, well, whatever. I go down, I get the water bottle, I come back, and there's a really big guy walking toward me. I'm about 6 feet. This guy was like 6'5", maybe 6'4". He was probably, I don't know, big, broad-shouldered guy. I don't know how much he weighed, but I played football with some 300-pound guys, and like he was that big. He was also really well dressed, and I can't tell you why. I remember seeing a wedding ring on his hand, and I don't know why I noticed it. I just did. He looked like he could run a bank or a hedge fund or whatever. And as we're going down the hallway, you usually if somebody's coming towards you, you sort of move off to the side. Hey, how are you? And well, when I did that, he moved directly in front of me. He didn't say anything. He didn't extend his hand, say hello, nothing. All he said was, and he kind of looked past me down the hallway and he said, yeah, so I've paid for some time with these girls down here, and sometimes they like to have somebody join us, and sometimes they like to have somebody watch. Are you interested? And my first thought was not all that Christ-like. My first thought was there's still enough of the pre-Jesus Charles where I'm thinking to myself, if I hit this dude in the face, he's going to go over the railing and land on his Jaguar, and I'm not going to be able to explain that. It just sickened me. So I just shook my head and I said no. And I went to my room. I saw him go down to his. A little while later, 2 females show up, and they're girls. I mean, I don't know. Are they 16? Are they 18? Are they 21? I have no idea, but they're somebody's daughter. And they were there about 45 minutes and they left. And then about 15 minutes later, he left. And I remember getting on the phone and calling Christy and just kind of unpacking it with her. I just got mad. I just got really, really mad. And I felt like, I told you this, I talk to the Lord about my stories all the time, but I felt like in that moment, he did a thing in me and put a thing in me that I just couldn't explain. I don't know how to explain it. It just made me mad. I go to my event that night and I'm still trying to process it. And so there's some people there and I just start my event, my little dog and pony show. I said, look, before I talk about writing or anything, I just want to tell you what happened. And when I finish, the guy that owned the bookstore comes up to me later and he says, look, I run a ministry where we rescue people that are being trafficked. We've rescued folks from your motel in and around the Atlanta area. And we hire Delta and SEAL and, whatever, all these kick down the door guys. And what you are explaining happens all the time, everywhere, from Hilton to Ritz to you name it. It is happening underneath our noses. And so that just started a rabbit hole for me, a rabbit trail. And the result, like I told you, when I was 15, I wrote because I didn't know how to process what was going on. And the writing was the processing. Well, the same thing is still true. I'm still processing. This time I just did it in 3 books rather than a short story.
So did you ever go on one of these rescue missions with anybody else to see what they do and see how it feels? Because you certainly portray it very well in the books.
No, I've actually never, been to kick down the door or whatever, but as this thing has sort of played out now, maybe 4 years or something since I started, 4.5 or whatever, people have heard my story. They've heard a podcast or they've read the book or whatever. And so a lot of folks have contacted me, and the folks that run ministries, and Pure Hope in Texas is one of them. And so a lot of these places have had me out, and, I've gotten to meet these ladies and these beautiful children of God who have been rescued. And you hear their stories, and I mean, my jaw kind of just drops. And there are two things I've realized, and I think this plays out in the book. I think Murphy does a pretty good job of saying this. There are really two rescues. There's the physical, where you got to get somebody out of the hotel room, and somebody's got to knock the door down, and thank God for those people. But that's only half the rescue, because if they've been there any length of time at all, there's a thing that happens as much as I'm able to understand, and that I've talked to them. There's a thing that happens where they feel so dirty and so shamed and so worthless. They begin thinking nobody will ever love me. So the second rescue is breaking that stronghold and healing this broken heart and loving on them. And that can happen quickly, but in my experience, it can take some time.
And in one of the books too, the Murphy Shepherd series, I don't remember which one, maybe The Waterkeeper, but you have one character who's been rescued. I don't want to name names and I don't want to give anything away, but she ends up going back to her captor. And when I had spoken, because I've done a little bit of investigative reporting, I have a degree in journalism and communications, and it's just in me also well, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody go back? And I've spoken with a guy named Eros Mackey, who runs adaptiveops.org, and they rescue women and children,
Right.
and men, women, and children. And he said that's something that actually does happen because of the Stockholm Syndrome. They're so brainwashed. They've been so beaten down. They don't know who to trust or who to believe. And what he has told me is that he's got a mission, and it's to go rescue the kids. And then the problem is nowadays, I know there's a building that's popping up here in Waco, Texas, by Unbound, and they have built a home for these rescued individuals to go and try to heal. But there's a need like that. There needs to be an actual Freetown.
Yeah. Well, I bumped into folks that are kind of doing a little bit of that. Freetown, obviously, I mean, I created what I wanted out of what I wanted with kind of limitless fun. So Freetown is pretty off the chain. I mean, I know that there are people who would love to do that, but it would take a lot of money to create a Freetown. But there are folks who are creating safe havens that are hidden, literally, with no social media footprint, no nothing, where primarily these girls, but it's also young boys, can feel safe to start with, and then start a process of healing.
Yeah. What advice would you give a writer, someone who's just starting and wants to tell stories like you do?
Early in my career, folks they'd see that I'd published, and they would, hit me up and say, "Hey, could we go to lunch? And could you help me, I want to be a writer." And so I thought it was my duty, like early in my career, to do that. So I sat down with a bunch of people, and we had that conversation, and they would ask me that. And I always shared the same information, and it's just, here's my experience. But I don't know if it was 100 people, maybe it was 50 people, whatever it was a lot of people. And I shared this with them, and only one of them ever took my advice, and only one of them is now published. So what I'm about to tell you may not be any good. Either they didn't do it or it doesn't work. But anyway, what I said was, books don't write themselves. You got to decide whether or not you want to write and be a writer, or you are enamored with what you perceive the life of a writer to be. Do you think it's podcasts, with whomever? Do you think it's interviews with a tweed jacket and a cigar, a pipe, and, Sherlock Holmes look, and people asking you intelligent questions and heralding you as somebody with a high IQ? I don't know what your perception is, but books don't write themselves. I show up at this thing every day. I'm talking to you on my work computer. And every morning when I show up, including this morning, there was a white page. No matter how many thousands and tens of thousands of hours I sit at this thing, it doesn't get the point. It doesn't like all of a sudden, I don't come in here in the morning at 4:30 and it goes, hey, Charles, you've worked really hard to train us and we get the point now. We've written a couple paragraphs. Just want to see what you think. It doesn't do that.
Take the day off, go, have a coffee. So what time do you start writing? That early?
Like this morning, I was up sitting here before 5, and I don't want to make it. I don't do that all the time. If I'm really working on a manuscript, I will. My brain will wake me up, and I think to myself, "Gee, I could write 3 hours and get a lot done, and it's quiet around here." And I do that a lot. But then there are mornings I sleep till 7:30, so don't whatever. It's I probably, and I've said this, there are better writers out there for sure.
I don't know. I got to tell you, I've read a lot of books. And I guess it depends on what you like, sure. But in your books contain everything that I value in a great novel. And it's the suspense, the intrigue. I'm telling you, you've probably heard this 100 times before or thousands. I can't put the books down. And they're so interesting. And so it feels like you get inside. We had a conversation about a character that I was almost mad at you.
Right. That's right. You can talk about Gunner. It's okay.
I can
Yeah,
talk about Gunner. We can have that conversation here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because I've had it with a lot of people. Trust me.
I almost wanted to stop reading when I thought you had killed off Gunner. I was like, that's it. I'm done. In fact, I did tell my friend who shared your books with me, I can't read that. I just can't read it. But I knew in the back of my mind that I just knew that you couldn't, but it kept you thinking, as I was reading. So again, an incredible page turner, but talk about Gunner a little bit.
You're supposed to feel that way.
Yeah.
With this in the scene about Gunner. I mean, I am doing that to you on purpose. Okay. Because we all love Gunner. For those of you that don't know, she's talking about the scene. I think it's in The Letter Keeper where you think Gunner is lost, and it was
and
painful.
Who is Gunner?
Gunner is Murphy's Labrador, and if you've looked at my social media at all, there actually is a real Gunner, owned kind of by my cousin, and he's just this beautiful yellow. He's just gorgeous, but he's a total knucklehead, meathead, and he's a lot of fun. But there's a scene in there where you think Gunner's gone, and you're supposed to feel that way.
It about killed me. But that's what makes it a good book. So I think I told you should put on the cover, Gunner does not die. The dog does not die.
You ask about writing. I really think writing is Eugene Peterson wrote a book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. He's talking about the walk of faith, but it's one of my favorite titles of all time, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And writing is like that. It is a grind. I'll spend 6 to 9 months in this chair with this thing on my lap, 6, 8+ hours a day. Like, I don't do lunches with people. I don't, Christine knows when I get that lost look in my eyes that I'm still in the book, even though I may not be sitting. I probably sweat my books more than I write them. It's the being a writer, and I love it. I'm grateful, like the Lord lets me do this, but being a writer is a whole lot of time behind this thing. And the folks that I know that did it once, that are not still doing it, or said they want to do it and aren't, really don't want to turn this thing off long enough to sit down here and focus and create something. And I can't put that in them. I can't make them do that. I can't convince them to do that. They got to want to do it or not.
It's like, I hear this from a lot of people when they meet my husband and they say, oh, they play the guitar, but they're not as good as Ted is. And there's a gift. You have a gift. Ted has a gift. A lot of people have gifts. They just don't realize them yet. But the difference between somebody like Ted and somebody like you, and then people who are trying to play the guitar, or people who are trying to write, is they're not doing the time. They're not sitting there, with their fingertips going in either playing the guitar or typing.
Yeah, I don't know how many tens of thousands of hours he has spent playing guitar. It's probably a lot, but he didn't start that way. I mean, he had to get better and develop and all that. Same thing with writing.
Yeah. He said that when he was a kid, he wanted to play guitar and his dad said, that's fine. But you're going to practice every day. So he said he literally had ridges underneath his rib cage from hunching over the guitar, playing so much, like marks there.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
it does take practice, but that's the American dream, is being able to do what you love and get paid for it. Right?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I didn't like when I didn't set out to become a writer, or I'm pointing at my wall over there that all of my books are on that shelf, and all the foreign editions I have. My books are now in 40 countries and 35 languages, and all that stuff. But that wasn't the goal. Like, what people perceive as my success was never the goal. The goal was, I think I can tell a story, and I can tell it in such a way that you're pulling for the characters, and maybe you even fall in love with them. But the thing I'm trying to get at, if I can tell it truthfully enough, is this thing in us, which as I get older gets more calloused and more hardened, and I'm not alone in that, I've learned. But if I write it in such a way with words, every now and then a word will slip past the hard places on my and other people's hearts, and they'll laugh, they'll cry, they'll maybe love somebody, they'll maybe forgive somebody. I mean, all of those things happened. Can I tell one story?
You can tell as many as you want.
I was at a book signing in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. I was in a Barnes and Noble, and it's not, I mean, at Barnes and Noble, they sort of shove you in the middle and they put like 20 chairs in there. And so as I'm doing my dog and pony show, all these people are milling around me, and it's just this weird sort of environment. But anyway, I've been to this store several times. The manager was great, loved her. She was awesome. And surprisingly, I show up and there are like 20, 25 people sitting there, which at the time was cool. I mean, it was great because I've been to a lot of those where 0 people showed. So it was, a good boost to my ego. So I'm sitting there and I can see the front door as I'm talking. So I'm holding the microphone talking. All these people are sitting there, and in the door walks a lady who's probably in her mid-20s. And I recognized her. I didn't know her. I didn't know her name, but I knew I'd seen that face before. And she had 2 other ladies that were with her. And she was beautiful, like drop dead beautiful, and walked in and kind of wound around and came all the way around to the chairs and sat on the front row, literally right in front of me. And her 2 friends are right next to her. And so I do my thing, and I'm thinking the whole time in my head, I'm thinking, I know this lady, but I can't figure it. So my thing ends, I sign books, and these 3 people are still sitting there. And after I sign the last book, the girl stands up and she comes over to me, and she's holding a copy of my second book, which is called Wrapped in Rain. And it's about this sweet lady named Mama Ella, who saves these 2 orphaned boys. And anyway, I looked at the book, and that's when it hit me. I remembered this girl because I had given her the book the year before in that bookstore. When I met her, she was real gaunt and pale. She had a lot of black eye makeup and black fingernails, and all her clothing was black. I don't know if my description is right, but I want to say goth.
Yeah,
That's all I know.
I would think. Yeah. Sounds like it.
But she was really sullen, and she came up to me afterward and she was asking me about my books, and she was, the only way I know how to describe her was super depressed. And I didn't know, I didn't know what to do. So she's talking to me, and I said, could I give you my book? So I gave it to her. I paid for it at the counter and signed it, and she left. So when she stands up and she holds out this book, and it's a beautiful book because it's yellowed and tattered. It's coffee stains. Literally, I don't know if it was duct tape, but there was tape along the binding. Like this book had, and then when she sort of folded it open, every page was, underlined and written on. I'm like, she had a conversation with my book. And she walks up, and I realized this girl is no longer this goth girl. She's really crazy beautiful. And all she said when she walked up to me was, this book walked me out of suicide. on the days that I didn't want to get out of bed and on the days that I wanted to swallow the pills, you convinced me not to.
Wow. Wow. And that's why you write books. That's why artists make music. That's why people do, is for the one. You talk about this in your books a lot. Wow, that's an amazing story.
It was a real turning point for me. It was just okay.
You're doing the right thing. Kind of a little nudge from God. Keep it up. You're helping people, right?
I didn't know what to say. I asked her, I said, and she's now working with a ministry that helps kids walk out of suicide.
Wow.
I just didn't, I mean, I was blown away. I got in my truck and I'm like, all right, Lord, I'm yours. Whatever you want to do with my career, you can have it. Because
How long ago was that?
10 years, I don't
Yeah.
know. I was talking about my third book because she handed me my second book. So that would have been 05, 06, somewhere in there. Gosh, 16 years.
Wow. Well, I am so glad that you kept writing. And I'm going to work backwards. I've read all of the Murphy Shepherd. I'm telling you, I think there should be a fourth one, but we'll talk about that.
You should read Long Way Gone. You should read Long Way Gone.
Okay.
It's
I was
about a
going to ask you
musician.
for your recommendation on the next one.
Yeah, go to Long Way Gone.
Okay. I will.
It's about a guy and his guitar.
Oh,
It's really my take on the prodigal.
do you play the guitar too?
No, I mean, I can strum really loudly. My son is the gifted musician. He can do, in my opinion, he can do anything on a guitar, but I'm not. But he helped me figure out how to write it. But it's the story of a son who betrays his dad and goes to Nashville and loses everything. And it's worth reading. You should read it. It's a good story.
I can't wait. I want to read all of them. I cannot wait. And then when it's the funniest thing. I often, if I'm not actually, I like to have a physical book in my hand, but if I don't, and I really want to, I've got to go run an errand or go bow hunting. Last night I did this. I put a little AirPod in my ear and I was listening, and sometimes Ted will be talking to me. I can't hear a word he's saying because I'm listening to your novels.
Sorry. Yeah.
I know, right? I'm like, what, honey? It's really getting good at this part. No. Well, gosh, thank you so much for spending time with us. I hope you can come back again and give us an update on what you're working on.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed it. It was great meeting you and great hanging out.
How can people find you?
CharlesMartinBooks.com. On social media, I am Storied Career.
And I had to search that out. But thank you. Thank you again so much for being here and what you're doing. God bless you. God bless you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk again. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.